I think learning and change is always challenging for us. It's easy to stay stuck in the old ways, the comfortable ways, the familiar ways, even though perhaps they're not always working so well. And sometimes we don't change until something happens, until we get a wake up call, until a relationship ends. Often is where we begin to look at ourselves and want to learn some new ways of behaving, new ways of interacting. In my practice in San Diego, where I work with couples who are wanting to learn a better way to connect and a more fulfilling relationship, one of the areas that I think is particularly challenging is learning how to change the type of interaction, the type of communication that they have when they're in conflict, especially. Because when we're in conflict, when we're having a disagreement, when we're having an argument with our partner, it really triggers a lot of emotional responses. And when we're emotionally triggered, it's particularly difficult to do things in a new way. But it certainly is absolutely possible. So I wanted to share today with you a model that I find really helpful in understanding the steps that we go through when we're learning something new, whether, again, it's a new behavior, a new habit, changing a habit, stopping a habit, or whether it's just learning something fun, like learning how to speak Italian, or for some of us, learning how to use our new cell phone. So the steps to learning and change really begin, the very first step, the very first stage, is what's called unconscious incompetent. And what that means, it's what I call the ignorance is bliss stage. That means you don't even know what you don't know. You don't know that there's another way. For example, a couple that I saw recently in my office, they came to see me after their 6-year-old daughter got in the middle of them when they were having an argument and said, "Mommy, Daddy, please be nice to each other." That was a huge wake-up call for them. And when they came in and they were telling me the way that they interact when they're upset with each other, when they're in conflict, they both said, I thought this was normal. I didn't know there was another way. So they were just beginning to recognize, and that's the second stage. And that's the stage of conscious incompetent. So this is the stage we're still incompetent. We don't know what to do or how to do something differently, something new. But we're very conscious, we're very aware of it. I think this is probably the hardest stage because, again, we know we want to do something different, but we don't know how to do it. We maybe don't know the steps, or maybe we've read the manual. It's kind of like learning the tango. We may have read the description and seen where the steps go, where our feet go. We may have even watched a YouTube video. But when it comes to actually learning how to do the tango, we need to get right in there with our partner and tango and get out on the dance floor. And that's a lot of what we do in my office. We learn by doing in the office. So conscious incompetent. What I recommend, again, second stage in learning, what I recommend is that you assume a beginner's mind. If you watch very young children learning, it's so fascinating. We have a almost 2-year-old grandson, little Grant. And I was, about a year ago, when he was just first learning to walk, we happened to be with them. And it was so fascinating because what I'd see was he'd get up on his little legs and he'd be kind of really wobbly, and he might fall down, and then he'd get back up, a little wobbly. He'd take one step, he'd fall down, get up, a little wobbly, take another step, maybe 2, fall down. But what was so fascinating is the determination that little boy had. He just kept falling down and getting up and falling down and getting up. I think when we're adults, sometimes it's hard for us to do that. We often have the tendency to think, well, I'm too old to do this. I'm too old to learn something new. You can't teach old dogs new tricks. But actually you can. You can learn something new. So again, conscious incompetent. We know we want to do something differently. We kind of have an idea of what we want to do, but we really don't know how to do it. Eventually, as we, have awareness of what we're doing, awareness of the goal, what we want to achieve, which might be, I want to be able to have a calmer conversation with my husband when we're upset with each other. That's a really worthy goal. And by practicing, by staying committed to that, by learning the steps, whether it's for couples, going to couples therapy, going to a workshop, reading a book, watching a YouTube video, watching other couples, or just trial and error. Eventually, we do that enough, we practice, get feedback, hopefully. When couples are changing the way they are, it really helps when the other person is giving you positive reinforcement and noticing and appreciating the changes that you're doing. And being patient with yourself, being patient with each other. Eventually, continuing that practice, feedback, observation, commitment process, eventually we get to the third level, the third stage in learning and change. And that's what's called conscious competent. So at this stage, we know how to do it, the new behavior. We know, for example, how to manage our defensiveness when we're speaking with our partner. We know how to soothe ourselves. We know how to help interrupt when we notice the conversation is going south and get it back on track. We know exactly the kinds of words to use that will make it easy for our partner to hear what we have to say. We know how to do that. We've done that. We're practicing that. We still need to be very conscious, and that's why it's called conscious competent at this stage. We have to be intentional and we have to be deliberate. We have to pay attention to what we're doing. But again, staying focused on our commitment, continuing having awareness, observing our behavior, observing ourselves, having that little part of ourselves that's watching us, practice, hopefully getting good feedback, and patience. We eventually get to that last stage, and this is the stage called unconscious competent, the fourth stage in the learning process or change process. This is where we go on automatic pilot. Unconscious competent. We know how to do it. We know how to do the same behavior. We can even communicate in this new way when we're under stress and when we're in conflict. Hugely important skill to be able to have in a relationship. And we're so comfortable with it that we actually, as I said, we go on autopilot. It comes naturally. It's where we've really developed a new habit, a new skill, and we can use it. And sometimes when we get to that level, it's hard to remember where we were at the beginning. I think it's one of the reasons why sometimes it's hard to teach something to somebody when you know it really, really well, because you forget what it was like to be a beginner. But unconscious competent, this is the stage we all want to get to. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen automatically. And it's not a freeway. We don't go from that first stage, unconscious incompetent, to the last stage, automatic pilot, unconscious competent. We don't go there. It's not a straight line. It's a very bumpy road with lots of detours and switchbacks and hills and wrong turns. But eventually we get there. And I think especially when we're changing our ways of relating with our partner and we see the difference that makes. We see, for example, on our children's face, like a couple just the other day said to me, you know, we realize as we've been changing, we see that our kids seem to be happier. Our kids seem to be more content, and it feels just more peaceful at home. I think that's something we all want.